Hi gang, for chapter 6, we're going to be taking a look at a new era in history, at least in terms of the time or what we call a period of time that we've actually already studied. We've talked about how from 1870 to about 1900 or so, give or take, that was in chapter 3, and a little bit in chapter 4, was this idea of the Gilded Age or Industrial Revolution. And then in chapter 5, we went back and we said, okay, from about 1850 all the way up to about 1920, give or take, that's going to be the age of imperialism. But we're going to add in something new here by taking a look at, I guess the best way to call it here would be from 1900 to 1920, the progressive era. So if there's something to take away from all of this as you look at this timeline, up here up top, this is the stuff that happens at home. This is domestic affairs. And down here, this larger timeline, these are foreign affairs. So we're kind of completing our timeline up to 1920 by taking a look at the domestic affairs from 1900 to 1920. And our overarching goal here in this chapter for all the lessons involved is whether or not government can fix social problems. And we want to take a look at how the progressive era is an attempt to fix some of the many social problems that emerged during the Gilded Age and the Second Industrial Revolution. And I think as we take a look at this together, what we're going to see is the only really way that the government is going to have a chance, and really government can't fix society's problems if it's corrupt. So what we're going to see here in the progressive era is an effort by progressives to make sure that the government is no longer going to be as corrupt. We're never going to get rid of it entirely, but the government can fix some social problems if we can figure out what the issues are at play, if we can expose that corruption, as we'll talk about with a group called muckrakers, and if we can then fix that corruption. So let's take a look at, and just a refresher with some of those problems that people said they were having in the 1900s as a result of the Second Industrial Revolution. One of those is going to be party politics and boss politics, kind of the machine politics of the Second Industrial Revolution. You can see here Tammany victory, right? And of course, what does Tammany Hall owe to its victory but money? So remember the graft of political bosses like Boss Tweed, giving contracts to people who give him kickbacks and getting the votes of immigrants in exchange for things like for housing and for jobs and safety. So that obviously is going to be one of the problems. Another one of the problems that we took a look at, and it's a substantial big problem, is the idea of social Darwinism and monopolies and big business taking advantage of those who are poor, who are less intelligent, who don't have as good circumstances. And we talked about how things like monopolies and being of the higher class can really give you a privilege in America that's going to be really hard to overcome, especially if you're an immigrant. So that was one of the other big problems that we had taken a look at. We also took a look at some of the difficult lives of immigrants, the kinds of jobs that they held. And we're going to take a look at that here in more detail this chapter, but we're going to focus on the efforts of people to fix these kinds of terrible jobs and these terrible working conditions that many immigrants will live in, including women and children who are at work at very, very, very young ages in America as they attempt to find work in this kind of factory economy. So the people that are going to make an attempt to fix all of this are the progressives. And of course, then the overarching question becomes, well, what's a progressive and who is a progressive? And it's not so much a who, in that it's not like a political organization, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure you're all aware we have two political parties in America. We have, currently anyway, we have the Democrats, two big parties, and we have the Republicans. And the progressives can come from either party. They're not a particular political party when they emerge in the early 1900s. That's just not how they work. So if you're looking up here at kind of this cartoon, the progressive Uncle Sam, who wants to kind of fix these situations, he's going to come from both political parties. And he is going to bring, since they're coming from both political parties, they're going to bring a bunch of different ideas to the table. So they're going to bring ideas from both the Republican Party and they're going to bring ideas from the Democratic Party. But if you had to summarize it, if you had to say overall, what are their reforms? It's going to be to give voters more control over government so that voters can kick out some of those party politicians and voters can do something about those big businesses that are causing such distrust in America. And that voters are going to be able to do something about those terrible working conditions that we see in places like factories and that immigrants suffer from. And we're also going to see them make efforts to, as this bottom bullet says, improve the lives of workers. So with that brief introduction as to kind of who progressives were, let's talk about what it is those progressives are going to do to actually kind of make this change, right? I mean, how are they going to actually go about fixing this corruption? And I think the thing that progressives really have going for them at this point in time is that they have a ridiculously strong faith in science and technology. And that's really, really important because this is, at the time, remember this, folks, that America at this point in time is a marvelous land of incredible opportunity and fast-paced change and just tremendous inventions and new things happening all the time. Like, think back, 1850, right before the Civil War, people were doing things like, farming their fields and making food pretty much the same way they'd been doing it for like the last 10,000 years. And now, in just 50 years, that's like one lifespan, folks. In just 50 years, all of a sudden, we invent the flipping airplane, the car, you can drive, you don't even need a horse anymore. We've got moving pictures with sound. This is a kinetophone, one of the earliest kind of forms of the movies, and so many other amazing inventions. So when we ask this question about can progressives fix government, well, yeah, I think they're going to look at this and they're going to say, if we can achieve these things for real, then yeah, we can approach this in a rational way. We can observe the problem, hypothesize a solution, test it, see if it works, make it happen. So they're going to use that almost that scientific method that has created such amazing change in America, and these progressives are going to apply that to the issue of fixing government. So if progressives are going to use this scientific method to fix the problem, first they have to observe it. They have to figure out what it is that they're actually going to be out there to fix, what it is that they're actually going to kind of observe and then expose and then actually fix when it comes to government corruption. And they're going to rely on a group of people called muckrakers. And what happens here is that part of the Industrial Revolution leads to all these mass-produced magazines and news journals and newspapers all over the country. And one of the things they're going to discover is that when you publish about scandal and corruption in government, you're going to sell a ton of newspapers. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, all right, get out there, reporters, be muckrakers, get out there and dig in the muck and find scandal, find problems that are out there in our country, in our government, write about them so the public gets angry about them, and then we get them fixed and we go on to find the next scandal and we find the next problem, and it's going to be awesome. And this is nothing new, folks. I mean, politicians had been under the gun from reporters writing about scandal for a long time, but what's different about it is the way in which muckrakers go about finding and publishing these problems. For example, Jacob Riis is one of the many who write books like How the Other Half Lives, which does focus on these social problems that are out there and publishes about them, but they use the camera in widespread ways never really thought of before for social commentary. Coming out of the Civil War and going into the Second Industrial Revolution, journalists realized the power of the picture to take people of different classes and force you to look at the conditions of others. So, for instance, when you see Jacob Riis talking about the incredible amounts of child orphanages or children that are homeless without anyone to care for them and no orphanages, and when he writes about this issue of drunkenness at an incredibly young age, then people are going to be moved by it because they can see it no matter where they live. They can see these kids on the poor. Riis called them his little street Arabs, this idea of creating kind of this exotic and almost pathetic existence of kids that are just helpless out here on the streets. And they write about things like crime. Here, for example, which is called Bandit's Roost, which is a back alley off Mulberry Street near Little Italy, I guess actually, which is now a part of Chinatown, this wide little section. But it's there off Mulberry Street, New York City, one of the most dangerous quarter miles in America, where you would walk down, with taking your life in peril, where people might be there to attack you, beat you, etc., mug you, all those kinds of things. So muckrakers are going to get out there, and they're going to be the ones that observe these problems so that our progressives, whether you're Republican or Democrat, can then fix those problems by proposing solutions to give people more control over government and over society. So following that trend, I think one of the easiest things to do then would be to see that if muckrakers can expose corruption in government, we can fix it. And of course, we know one of the classic examples is the political machine, right? We know that political machine takes power away from voters because it almost manipulates voters to vote for a certain party. Whether you get out there and you vote once with your beard for the Democrats in Tammany Hall, then you shave it to the mustache and you vote again, then you vote again with no mustache, right? We have to find ways to take power back from machines and give it back to the voters. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here of what progressives do to give voters more control over their politicians in office and less power to those political machines that use graft and take advantage of workers in more difficult ways. One of those would happen up in Wisconsin, actually, believe it or not, which is called the direct primary. And you can see it over here on this slide to the left. The idea in a direct primary is that instead of having political machines say who you can or can't vote for, we're going to give people the power to choose directly who it is they want to vote for. They're not going to be bullied by those political machines into voting for just one candidate. There's only one person who's running for Democrats, so we're going to make sure that you have to vote for that one, or that there's only one person running for Republicans, so you can only vote for that one, giving those political machines incredible power. Instead, what we're going to see happen is lots and lots of people running for political office, no matter what party you're in, and we're going to see those same people then attempt to get the votes of individuals. So here's an example actually from our current presidential elections that's running right now as the primaries are set to kick off here in January 2016. So on the right-hand side, you have Republicans, and you can see that there was a boatload of Republicans who wanted to run for this office. You've got 17 different Republicans on this page right here who've run, and you can see that 5 of them have already dropped out. So we really have still here 12 different candidates? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 different candidates still running for the Republican candidate for president for 2016. And over here, Democrats get to choose from 3 different candidates that we think are going to be running for office in 2016. And the idea is when it's your state's turn to vote, you go vote for whatever person you want in your party. And that's the person your state will choose. And eventually this will narrow down and we'll have 1 Democrat and 1 Republican who's running for office. But this definitely says, okay, voters, you get to choose the field. There isn't just 1 Democrat and 1 Republican that you get to choose from, picked for you by some political machine. Another example of what we're going to see here is going to be the initiative. And the initiative says, you know what, citizens of America, is there something that you think is really important that you want to force your government to vote on? What if a political machine doesn't want to vote on something? Well, you can force them to vote on it with the initiative. The way it works is, if something really important, you have to go out and you have to get a whole bunch of signatures. I don't know, maybe it's 10,000 signatures or 15,000, whatever it is. And when you get those signatures, you can force your government to vote on the issue. For example, maybe it's on the legalization of marijuana. Maybe you want your state to vote on that. Lots of states have done this. This is how Colorado did it, how Washington did it. They got out, they had a bunch of people sign a petition that said our government has to vote on whether or not we should have marijuana legalized in our country for medicinal uses or even recreational uses. That's the reason those votes happened in those states. It wasn't that those states wanted to do it. The people said, we're going to have these initiatives, and we're going to see just what those people in our state, in our government, are going to do if we pass this initiative. The second thing is called a referendum, and that's when the legislators of a state can say, you know what? This is such a really big and important issue. We need to make sure that everyone in our state has the opportunity to vote on it. So here's a referendum that took place over in Europe just about a year ago, which was a really big issue. Should Scotland be an independent country? That's a freaking huge issue that probably a lot of people in Scotland want something to say about that, right? So they let everyone choose to vote on this. And a certain day, everyone went to the polls, and you just put an X. Should Scotland be an independent country? Should it no longer be a part of Great Britain and the United Kingdom? That was a really big deal, and that's called a referendum. The other really big voting reform that takes power away from political machines, right? Because obviously, if we're saying to people that you can make your party, your political machines vote on things with initiatives, and you can cast a direct vote yourself in a referendum that makes a law, well, then the other thing that we really want to do is what's right above my head there, which is going to be suffrage, expanding the right to vote. Because if you get more and more women out there voting, then more and more issues are going to be important to the average American at the polls and to the average politician. So women in the progressive era had to fight a long time to get the right to vote. It wasn't given until 1920, and it was done on a state-by-state basis. And we'll see this tomorrow, that states, one at a time, started to elect women the right to vote, and over time it picked up pace, so that by 1920, when the 19th Amendment was passed, and you can see that right here, passes and permits either sex the right to vote, then we actually had close to a majority of all states allowing women the right to vote already. So this is yet another way in which we could see more and more women getting the right to influence policy, more and more women getting the right to influence government, and taking it away from just what men might want with those political machines and those party politicians. So there's three quick ways, or four quick ways, I should say, progressives were able to use the right to vote to take power away from those corrupt politicians and give it instead to the people. So let's just take this to the next possible or the logical conclusion of this experiment, right? If we have exposed corruption, option one in the scientific method, right? So we've got a observation of corruption in government and in our society. Step two, hypothesize. What's our solution? If we can fix government corruption, then we can fix social corruption because government isn't as corrupt. Then we can actually see if these experiments have results, and can government actually make some positive change to our society. So let me give you a couple of big things that progressives were in fact able to do once we got a little corruption out of our government. Some social reforms included an effort to really have a minimum workday, so that you couldn't force people to work 15 hours a day. You could only work 8 hours a day. We even saw laws that said you could have minimum work weeks, so that you could actually have only so many days a week you could work. And we're going to see people say that kids under a certain age have to go to education, and that's a really big deal because it's going to start to begin to force an end to child labor. That's really, really, really huge. Child labor will continue for a long time. Up until the 1930s, you're going to really see child labor continue, but it begins to end. And that's what you need to understand. Remember from that first slide, the progressive era goes from 1900 at one end of the spectrum all the way over to 1920, and really in an issue like child labor, it's going to take it to the 1930s to really see social change, but it's actually happening now. It's actually going to be able to happen. The other big change that we're going to see is called the temperance movement, and that's going to start in an effort to really help fix society because of the terrible things that alcohol does to our people. For example, alcohol was such a problem in the early 1900s that you would see tons of rapes, abuse, domestic violence, crime, all fueled by alcohol. So the temperance movement, pushed by women, is going to begin to take effect to actually slow the consumption of alcohol, to try and fix some of the problems that alcoholism brings. You know how there's a heroin epidemic, most recently in Pennsylvania, causing a lot of social problems? Alcohol was the same way back in the early 1900s. So the temperance movement, pushed by progressives, is going to be an attempt to fix some of those social problems. The other big thing that you'll see people try to do for society is fix the way big business hurts our people with its low wages, forcing them to have low rents, live in tenements, etc. So you're going to actually begin to see progressives start to push for more regulation of business to protect workers. And we're going to talk about that a lot. We're going to see people begin to push back that idea called laissez-faire, which says government shouldn't be involved. On the contrary, progressives will say government needs to be more involved. We need to regulate business, regulate wages, regulate working hours, so that society can be a better place for its people to live. Some of these progressives will even go as far to push for something called socialism, which is the opposite of laissez-faire. If laissez-faire is no government intervention, then on the other side of that equation is socialism, which is government actually owning business and fixing all of the problems, but giving people no choice about profit or wages or any of those kinds of things. Government runs the show. Highly controversial idea, totally opposite to what our economy has been based off of, and it's still controversial today. So we're talking about an idea that's been controversial now for like 115 years, that we've been wrestling with this concept of socialism, longer than that, really. And we'll talk more about it as we go throughout class. So there's a brief introduction to progressives, how they want to fix government, some of the things they want to fix in society, and we'll talk more about it in this chapter as we go.